What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Plains Perspective podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Sorry about missing last week. We were on spring break, so me and a few buddies, we were out of town at the beach, just kind of enjoying it a little bit. But we're back at it today. And today I just kind of wanted to recap the season that Auburn basketball had, starting from Coach Pearl to the schedule to, talking about next year a little bit and kind of breaking everything down from my perspective and from what I've seen so far. And so the first thing I want to talk about is Stephen Pearl. Okay. And here's the thing about Stephen Pearl. And a lot of people are calling for his job and calling for his head because they didn't make the tournament and because they had lackluster performances. And I'm not denying that. But here's some context around, these flaws that Stephen had this year. First of all, this is not Steven's team. This was Bruce's team that Steven inherited. Bruce and Steven might have helped create the team, but at the same time, Bruce signed off on every player that came to Auburn. And so, Steven, he didn't have, the respect from these players to a certain extent due to these players coming in expecting to play for Bruce Pearl. And when they got here, they ended up playing for Steven. And that goes down to the discipline issues with guys being late to film and guys being late to team breakfast. And that's why we had guys coming off the bench, 25 games into the season, which is unacceptable. That's a discipline problem. That's not anything else. That's something that your culture is set to do. And so I think part of that, the reason that these guys had such a problem with the discipline aspect of it is because they weren't there to play for Steven. They were there to play for Bruce. So you have to understand that aspect, a little bit of it, and cut a little bit of slack on that. And, for me, I think next year's make or break for Steven because that's his team, that's his culture, that's his staff. Everything that Auburn basketball is next year is Steven Pearl. And, and for me personally, just because I love Auburn, I'm hoping he lives up to the expectations and whatnot, and I'm rooting for him. There's people out there that are cheering for him to fail and whatnot because of nepotism and, whatever. That's cool. Do that. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue to cheer for a guy whose dad put us in the Final Four for two times when Auburn was at an all-time low whenever he took over the program. And so if, Bruce Pearl having to give us two Final Fours for his son to coach for 2 years if he ends up not making it next year, I'm taking that every single day of the week, And so I give a little bit of leniency when it comes to Steven just because of that. But next year is definitely a make or break year. And I feel like the way he needs to recruit out of the transfer portal and the way he recruits out of high school are going to tell a lot. I feel like we'll know how well this team is going to be by the end of the transfer portal, personally. And I'm hoping that, Steve and the staff around him go out and understand the flaws that this team had. Because at the end of the day, this team, we had a very, very solid, very, very good team if all of the players on the team were backups. And I hate to say that, but the only two people who would have been starting in the SEC anywhere else was Tahad Pettiford, and I'm not a big fan of this guy, but Keyshawn Hall. And that's just because of his scoring ability, and, it's hard to keep a guy who scores 23 points on the bench. But those, like Kevin Overton, he would be such a good backup. Keyshawn Murphy, he came in to be a backup. Auburn just did not pursue another big in the portal, and I don't understand that. And that's where I blame Bruce. Because Steven could have suggested that, but at the same time, like I said, Bruce signs off on every single player that comes to Auburn. So if we would have picked up another big and had Keyshawn Murphy coming off the bench, that would have been such a solid pickup. But no, he was put in a position he was not ready to be put in as a starting five in the SEC. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on Steven. And, I think it's next year's really, really going to be a make or break for him. And I'm hoping, like I said, I'm cheering for him. I hope he picks up the right guys, and I hope he understands the problems that this last team had, and I hope he picks up guys that respect him, want to play for him, not play for, Bruce Pearl. And so I'm hoping that that all works out for him. But we'll kind of feel it out, and we'll talk about it more as, transfers come in and people start to visit and whatnot. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the Stephen Pearl situation. The next thing I want to talk about is the schedule that Auburn faced this year. So this is non-conference. We played number 1 Houston. We played number 7 Michigan. We played number 14 St. John's. We played number 2 Arizona. We played number 6 Purdue. That's all non-conference. And in a day and age where the way that March Madness looks at tournaments. Because if Auburn goes in there and they schedule cupcakes for those, they're in the tournament, no doubt. And I think when Bruce Pearl made this schedule, he was thinking he was going to have an elite team like he did last year, and that just was not the case. And so when you get a team who doesn't have a lot of chemistry, who doesn't click together very well yet, and you play number one Houston the fourth game of the season, which they ended up playing pretty well in that game. They had they lost by 1 point, 73-72, and and that's the thing about this team. I think they had the potential there. I just don't think they had the chemistry and the unselfishness to really max at that potential. So but then they go out and play Michigan. They lose 102-72. That's a 30-point loss against a very, very talented Michigan team. I will say that Michigan was very, very talented. They go out and they lose to Michigan. That blows your confidence down to a level that a team like this can't afford to have. When you have a bunch of backups starting, basically, your confidence is as high as you allow it to be. And so when you go out and lose by 30 to Michigan, that just, from, that early in the season, it messes with your mind, it messes with your confidence and whatnot. I will say this. The next game they played St. John's and they won, 85-74, which was a great win. It was a quality win. But, Pettiford had 27 points. And, I noticed, St. John's, they won, and let's see, they won 85-74. They won by 9. And Pettiford had 27 points. And like I said, when he takes over a game, he's a very, very special kid. And the reality behind it is that we didn't allow him to do that enough this season, which was unfortunate because I feel like the ceiling was so high. And I think St. John's was our best win this year, I'd say, other than the win at Florida. But like I said, going back to the non-conference play, their confidence just was not at a point where they could face these teams and feel good enough to win. You know what I mean? And look at this. Look. They lost to Michigan 102-72, lost to Arizona 97-68, lost to Purdue 88-60. That is 3 30-point losses before you even get into conference play. How do you think a guy like, Elijah Freeman, who just got from the D2 level, Kevin Overton, how do you think guys like that are going to react to 3 30-point losses before you even get into conference play? You know what I mean? And I feel like if they would have scheduled a little lighter and scheduled a little bit more to this team's strengths, we would be talking about something a little bit different here. I feel like they could have finished more games out in the SEC play because you're playing in almost useless games. You're not really getting anything from these games because you're getting beat by 30 every game. You know what I mean? And then when we head into SEC play, lost to Georgia in overtime, and then we lost to Texas A&M on that ridiculous last-second shot that was kind of as no good or whatnot. I was actually at that game. Unfortunate event, but that's just kind of how it is. And then we went to Arkansas came to us. This is our first SEC win. We win 95-73, and when this team played up to its potential and shot the ball well and played through the right people, Tahad had 7 assists this game. If they would have just let Tahad handle the ball, and you'll notice a trend as I go down the schedule of what players did what and what benefited the team to lead to a win, because that's a dominant win over a team that just won the SEC championship. And if you can beat a team 95-73 who just won the SEC championship, you can win any game on your schedule. Next game, we lose to Missouri, 84-74. I mean, that is what it is. That's just an unfortunate loss. Then you go out and you beat Ole Miss 78-66, who just played well in the NCAA tournament. Let's see here. And then you go to Florida. The at Florida win, I feel like, no. You beat South Carolina, which was a 4-point game, which is ridiculous. That's just not a good team. You know what I mean? And you only win that game by 4. You beat Ole Miss by 12, and then you go and you beat Florida by 9. And Florida was such a huge win. Keyshawn, he had the first 7 points, with 24. Murph had 9 rebounds, which is solid. Everyone did their job. And here's where my problem is. So in this Florida game, if you go back and rewatch that Florida game, and me and my dad were talking about this a little bit, Auburn had an identity. They went out there, they played hard. Their identity was not, Keyshawn Hall chucking up random shots. Their identity wasn't, Taha chucking up random shots. Their identity was they're going to play hard as hell and they're going to beat you on the glass. They're going to beat you on, they're going to do the little things. And so they did all this. And if you go back and rewatch that game and you pay attention to the little things, that's what Auburn did. They played hard as hell. That's how they won that game. And then they lost it. They stopped doing that. They won a game. They got complacent. And that's where I blame Steven a little bit. You cannot have a culture where you win a game like that and you become complacent. So they go back. They do get another win against Texas, 88-82. But then you lose. You lose 1, 2, 3, 4. You lose 5 games in a row because you want to know why? One word: complacency. It's ridiculous, and that's where I think Steven can benefit. Because you had a team who had a great identity. Because scoring was not your identity. You had, you know what I mean? You didn't have, you had one elite scorer, but the way he scored did not help your team as much as it, it didn't destroy, but, kind of with the chemistry aspect of it, it didn't really help. But let's see. The next game, they go out and play Tennessee. They lose 77-69. Okay, that's a good team. Lose to Alabama 96-92, which Tahad had a great game. That was a good game. They had Charles Bediako, who had a big impact on that game, and so I'm not going to blame him too hard on that. And then you go to Vanderbilt, you lose 84-76. That's a game you have to win. And I know Vanderbilt just made it the SEC championship game. That is a game you have to. If you go on the road, if they play the same way they did against Florida, and they had that identity of playing hard and rebounding and making free throws and making the right plays, they go out and they win 2 of those 3 games. But you know what they do? They go out there, they got complacent, they go back to what they were doing at the beginning of the season of just chunking up random shots because they think that they're better than they really were. And that's where the problem comes in. It's a culture aspect. You have to change the culture to be able to make sure that doesn't happen. Because literally during the game, I was watching it with me and my dad and my mom. Me and my dad were talking. It is an identity that they dominated. If they would have just been that way the rest of the season and just bought into being, doing the little things, playing harder than everybody else, wanting it more. But no, they switched back to doing what they were doing at the beginning of the season and just playing selfish basketball. And, like I said, they lost to Tennessee, lost to Alabama, lost to Vanderbilt. Then they go in, they lose to Arkansas 88-75. And that's another aspect. Keyshawn Hall, he was out. He played, but he came off the bench. That's another disciplinary problem. So here's a few things that's happened since the Florida game. They weren't playing with the identity they did in that game. They had disciplinary actions, and, Tahad had to take over the team. And so, Tahad had 29 points in that game, but, they lost by 13. And they should have lost by worse. It was worse. And then you go and you play Mississippi State, and you lose that game 91-85. And so this is a game where Josh Hubbard puts up 45 points. You think a team who's bought into, and I understand some of the shots you can't control. Some of the shots were ridiculous. But you think a team who buys in to playing hard and doing the little things and being in the gaps and taking offensive fouls and whatnot. Do you think a team like that lets a guy like Josh Hubbard put up 45 points? No, you don't, because it doesn't happen. But then we go on the road, and and here's where I credit this team. This is where I credit this team. They go and play Kentucky, right? They win 75-74, and Elijah Freeman is a dog, and I think he has potential. I think he has the most pro potential on this team. He really is such an athlete. And at the end of he's a good guy, too. I've talked to him after games. Great guy. And so I will give this team credit. They got a win when they needed a win the most. But then what happens? They get complacent. And you'll notice this. After big wins, they continue to get complacent. So they beat Kentucky 75-74, which was a huge win. Keyshawn Murphy played phenomenal in that game. He had 25 and 10, which good for Murph. I'm happy for him. Go to Oklahoma. Lose 91-79. You cannot go on the road and lose a game like that to an inferior opponent at the end of the day. And that's what they do. It's because they get complacent, and that's a word I'm harping on because it's a word that's the truth. And then they lose to Ole Miss, 85-79. You lose to the 15th team, and this is at home. You lose to an Ole Miss team at home who's the 15th team in the SEC. That's unacceptable. And as I was going back, I'm cheering for Steven and whatnot. I'm not. But as I'm looking at this schedule, I'm getting more and more frustrated at these patterns because this is all stuff you can fix from inside. But at the end of the day, these are players that Bruce recruited, and so this is a culture he set. When you get these guys in, the players you can as a coach you can try and create the culture, but the guys you bring in are the ones who have to set that culture. And so then we have LSU at home. We ended up winning that one 88-74. Tahad had 27 points. Elite performance. And that's the thing. Look, if they let that game, they let Tahad run it through him, right? Let Keyshawn Hall off the ball a little bit. Tahad had 27.6 rebounds. Let Keyshawn Hall off the ball. Let him score naturally. It wasn't ISO ball. It was scoring naturally. You know what I mean? And what do they win that game. What do? They go away from that. The next game, they play Alabama. Kevin Overton played, very well in that game. But they went away from it, and, it was back to chunking up random shots. And I don't understand that. Whenever you have something good going, why change it? So with the Florida game, it was their identity was the little things. They played hard. They did what was needed to do. They played defense. They boxed out. Because on piece of paper, Florida wins that game by 40. You don't win that game without doing those little things. So, and then we go to, like I said, we were at LSU. Tahad played phenomenal. Keyshawn Hall was off the ball. They were playing team basketball like they had been all season. What do? They go to Alabama and completely go away from what they were just doing. It's ridiculous, and it's just sad because this is a team who, if they would have just stuck to an identity that was working and stopped getting complacent and stopped playing selfish after a win, the season is talked about completely different. And then they play Mississippi State first round of the tournament. They ended up dominating that game 79-71. Whatever. Mississippi State sucks. You let Josh Hubbard score 45 last time. Then you lose a must-win game against Tennessee. And Tennessee had been injury prone, and their best player had been out for 5 games, and he came back, and he does get a pretty friendly whistle. And Tahad had another 28. But he had 28 of 62 points. You're not going to win very many games putting up 62 points in the SEC. It's just the way it is. But yeah, that's kind of the breakdown of the schedule, and kind of a pattern I've noticed, even just now going over all this, is after a big win, you think they have an identity, and they just went away from it. Did they not watch film on the games they won? You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. All right, moving on. I want to talk about Tahad Pettiford next, and right now he's probably, if I had to guess, he's probably gone next year. If I had to put money on it, but which is very, 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 very unfortunate. He's been by far my favorite Auburn player to come through here, and the thing about him leaving, I wouldn't blame him. You know what I mean? His coach retired. The offense wasn't ran through him throughout the most of the year. I would be frustrated, and I would want to leave. The only way he stays, I feel like, if Auburn drops a little bit of a check on him. But like I was saying earlier, if we would have ran the game through Tahad and let him get to his game and let Keyshawn score naturally off the ball, which he can do, this team, I feel like, is at least 5 wins better, minimum. And if you do that while taking in the identity of playing hard, I think this team is 8 wins better, personally. And that's what's a little frustrating. And that's where I'm kind of understanding people want Stephen fired, because that's all coachable. As a coach, you set the identity of your team. You know how you do that? When a guy's not fitting your identity and the culture you set, what do? You take him out. So you bench a guy for being late to breakfast, but you don't bench a guy for not setting the tone for your culture. That's where it becomes frustrating for me. But yeah, like I said, Tahad, I mean, if this is his last season here, I'm going to cheer for him no matter where he goes, as long as it's not like in Alabama. You know what I mean? But I really am excited for his future, and I hope he continues to do well. But I just want to give him a little shout out, just because, a lot of Auburn fans were talking trash on this year, but those were just people who don't understand the game of basketball and understand his role was different, and understanding that the way that Auburn's offense ran this year, it didn't allow him to be the player that he could be until like specific games where, and I personally think that was not part of the game plan. I think Tahad just took over and he was like, whatever, this is what wins us games, because he's a winner, and Keyshawn Hall, he's not a winner. He's not. He's played for 4 different teams, and he hasn't made the tournament once. At the end of the day, that's what it is. And that's a guy, Bruce Pearl, went out there and recruited. You don't recruit a guy who's your leading scorer but can't make a tournament. And it was like, and UCF made the tournament this year. So I just feel for Dahad, and I'm hoping he stays, but I would not be surprised if he's gone next year. Yeah. But yeah, and then the next thing I want to talk about is next year. So let's see, we're losing. Let's see, we'll lose Keyshawn Hall, probably Taha Pettiford, probably or we'll lose Keyshawn Murphy. Caden Magwood's gone, and so we'll have probably three returning players if I had to guess: Elijah Freeman, Sway, and Filip Jovic, which are three solid guys. Because Elijah Freeman has that potential. If they would let him take as many shots as Keyshawn Hall took, I think we'd be a way better team. The problem with his is problem he has with his shooting. If you notice, he shoots everything long. If he would go straight up instead of pushing the ball, this is a different athlete, and this is and so that's a lot to work on in the offseason. I think he'll be elite next year. What did he shoot from three this season? He shot 33%. Kevin Overton shot 38% from three, and he had a solid year. He has one more year, but he's transferred every year, so I don't expect him to stay either, to be honest with you. And even if he does stay, you have to go out and recruit over him. You have to go get a two guard to be elite and have Kevin Overton come off the bench because that's what's best for the program and that's what's best for Auburn basketball. And so next year, this is what you need to do. If Tahad leaves, you need to go get an elite guard. You need to go get Elijah Freeman can start at the three. You need to go get an elite five. I'm talking about spend a check on an elite five. And then you can have Sway and Filip Jovic switch out at the four. And then go get a solid backup too. And we didn't have any depth this year either, so go get some depth in the portal. And then if Kevin Overton stays, go recruit a guy over him and let Kevin Overton go off the bench. So the dream scenario is Taha Pettiford starts, get a guy in the portal for the two, Elijah Freeman at the three, Sway at the four, get an elite guy at the five, and then you get a backup PG out of the portal, Kevin Overton backup shooting guard, and then get a versatile 3/4, and then get a solid five. And this team could be elite next year. Auburn has the money and has the funds for it. They just have to spend it in the right places in the right area. And that's what I'm saying. If Stephen Pearl can't do that next year, I think, am I even just going over this, even just like as we've been doing this podcast, my perspective on him, the Plains perspective, my perspective on this has changed. His leash has gotten so much thinner because going back and looking at that roster or that schedule is just it's coachable. It's the culture you set inside your program. And I know I said the players, so maybe he was trying to do that, but he just had the players who wanted to do that. So I'm hoping he goes out. Another thing, Auburn did. A lot of people want to say Keyshawn Murphy. Auburn did not have a vocal leader this year. They didn't. I mean, people say Keyshawn Murphy, and he's a quiet guy. That's not a guy who's very, very, very like vocal and a vocal leader. So go get guys who want to be a lead and set the tone for culture. And to like kind of compare like to football, like Byron Brown, if you've been looking at these videos, he's been a leader. He's been a vocal leader. So go get a guy like that. And Caden Magwood's definitely gone, which I hate for that. He has a lot of potential. He just had a little bit of off the court issues, which can't be doing all that. But I hope the best for him as well. And then Auburn plays in the NIT tonight. There's rumors of guys sitting out, so we'll see about that, and we'll see how legit that is. But I'm gonna watch the game because I'm an Auburn fan. So that's just what it is. And if Auburn was at NIT, please, for the love of God, do not hang that banner. Just take it, but don't put it on. Don't hang it. And a lot of people were very hit or miss with NIT and whatnot, but I mean, it's another home game. It's another time. It's another way to make money. Another guys who probably won't play basketball again and get to play another game, suit it up in college, and so there was a lot of pros, but and I get the cons, or it makes you look like a cheap program or whatnot. But I mean, it is what it is, and hopefully go out there and compete, and hopefully, which it's too late to see. They're not gonna go out there and have the identity that they could have had all season. They're not gonna do that because if they were gonna do that, it would have been 10 games ago. So here we are, and we'll see how it goes. And at least we get to watch Top Effort in an Auburn jersey one more time, unless he opts out tonight. I don't know yet, but that's just what it is. All right, guys. Well, I will catch you on the next one. I went on about a 25-minute rant there, but that's just the way it is about Auburn basketball and Auburn athletics in general. Thank you so much for joining the Plains Perspective, and War Eagle.